Hey, welcome back to Academy Anonymous. I'm Jules.
And I'm Joseph.
And welcome to our first episode of season 2, covering everything from the Oscar race to interesting news happening in the industry, to films and film culture. And we just finished waving goodbye to the 2024-2025 Oscar season. And we're beginning this new chapter.
Right.
And we're very excited because we actually started this podcast a few months ago.
Yeah.
So we were starting the 2024-2025 season around December, which was really,
really close to the end.
Close to the end.
That first phase.
Exactly, of the nominations being revealed by the Academy. And so, we started pretty late, sort of very much in media res. And we got to see it through, but this is actually our first opportunity to tackle the race from the very beginning.
Yeah.
So that's pretty exciting. And we're glad that you're here with us.
Right. So Oscar season 2025 to 2026, blank page, starting completely new, fresh. Everything from last year is gone, is by the wayside.
Yeah.
We'll see. Maybe there's going to be a factor and some carryover. It could be really interesting.
Right.
But a whole brand new board to start with. And everyone starts at zero.
Right.
Right. And I couldn't think of a better way than to launch our second season than to discuss what is probably one of the biggest events, for film and certainly for Oscar season, which is the festival that occurs at the very beginning of the year in January. And let's do a Sundance recap.
Right.
Let's recap what we saw. Let's recap what the lineup was. Let's recap what we think, the pieces on the board officially and where we think some of their strengths and weaknesses are, some of the things that caught our eye. I think that's the best place to start.
Yeah. And some of the things we might start talking about now, we might be talking about all as well throughout the year.
Exactly.
As things start to heat up.
Exactly.
And you know what? The Sundance is always a very interesting thing because it's, such a world famous festival, especially for independent film, but it always happens typically right smack in the middle of all this Oscar chaos. The nominations have come out. The campaigning for the phase 2 of the Oscar winners is underfoot. So it's sort of happening right at a moment when everyone is sort of really focused on what's going to happen with the Oscars.
Yeah.
And so it always feels like so early to start talking about films for the following year when the Oscar ceremony hasn't even wrapped up yet.
Yeah.
So in that way, the Sundance is kind of strange, the timing.
Right.
But it's also exciting because you get your first glimpse of films that are going to be talked about throughout the year, hopefully.
Yeah.
And in that way, it's a very exciting festival, and we had the opportunity to attend this year. We saw a large number of films, both in person and virtual. And of course, with the news that Sundance may be moving soon, it's one of the final opportunities you have to see the Sundance lineup and screenings in the Utah location, which is so synonymous with Sundance, its success, its legacy. So that's always nice. And yeah, what do you think?
I completely agree. Very fortunate to be able to head out over there, meet a lot of really interesting people, attending screenings, working the festival. I also think, there's no better time to be talking about Sundance because right now, I think Deadline was reporting that Utah's governor is having an issue with the idea that they want to ban the pride flag from sort of government institutions, and that is going to directly affect whether Sundance participates in that state. I think it's an absolute no-brainer for Utah state, Utah government officials, the people of Utah. It is dumb to force Sundance out of Utah. So synonymous the experience with Utah in the background, such appreciation that festival goers have for Utah and the infrastructure they have there is just amazing. Yeah. To sort of split hairs on an issue that is that stupid is just really sad and, disappointing. And there's snow and mountains in other areas. Colorado is right there. Right. You know what I mean? So don't mess this up for a stupid reason.
Yeah. And, that's part and parcel with the, climate that we're all undergoing right now, which is just seems to be filled with disappointment after disappointment, news and news and news. So It's not surprising, but it's very disappointing to hear.
Right.
And so we'll see what happens there.
Yeah.
I certainly think they're going to end up moving to a different location, which again is going to be bittersweet because again, the Utah mountains has been always so synonymous with the experience of Sundance as a whole. So
Yeah, but it's tough to go where you're not welcome.
absolutely, 100%, I agree. We're not welcome. Don't worry, there are plenty of other places that will be happy to have us.
Exactly.
All right.
Well, let's start digging into these lineups. And I think the best way to proceed is let's talk about documentaries first.
Right.
And then we'll work our way into the narrative films. And I think the reason for that is because, looking through Sundance history, one of the things that sticks out foremost in my mind is that this is the place where you want to premiere a documentary.
Right.
This is an excellent place for the future of documentary filmmakers. They have a lot of support from the institution, Sundance Institute, but beyond that, members are going to be watching these films, the films that were selected, the films that won some type of award, the films that were able to get a lot of attention. And I think this is the best place to start because Sundance is so documentary rich.
And when we mention members again, we're talking about, big picture, eventually the Academy members.
Right, exactly. So, from what I've seen historically, we'll be seeing maybe at least, I want to say, 2 to 3 eventual Oscar nominees for Best Documentary from within this lineup of U.S. documentary, world documentary, and possibly premieres. And that's just nominees. When we talk about the shortlist that I believe includes up to 15 films, we'll be seeing many more shortlisted.
Yeah.
The films here are incredibly popular. They have a lot of success down the line, and they're just wonderful every year. And this year was no exception. And there's a lot of titles that are already working their way up that sort of screening list that members are going to start, developing over a year's worth of time of movies premiering and them reading stories on them and them seeing it win awards and premiere in certain festivals. So there are a lot of standout documentaries already.
Right. And so as you were saying, Joseph, this Sundance is such an important platform for documentaries. You can expect many of these documentaries to be films that people and critics and voters discuss and contemplate throughout the rest of the year. Looking at the U.S. Documentary competition, there are a few titles here that I think really stood out and people were very much talking about, very much had a lot of buzz. And so let's see, a crowd favorite was Selena y los Dinos,
Yep.
which I believe Netflix is in the hunt to try to pick up. I believe, if I'm not incorrect, obviously a documentary about the great Selena Quintanilla, and never before seen footage of her and her family and her band, Los Dinos. And so that's going to be a crowd pleaser. And there's a film that many people talked about, and I believe it's actually premiering. I mean, it's also having a screening at South by Southwest currently. And it's The Perfect Neighbor.
Oh, yeah.
Right, which we got a chance to see, which is a very compelling documentary, a very powerful documentary, very disturbing documentary about a dispute in an impoverished Florida neighborhood that escalates into something really ugly and catastrophic. And that made quite a few waves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was certainly one of the most talked about titles on the festival roster, narrative or documentary.
Yeah.
A lot of people were able to watch it. Without, going too deep into spoilers, I will say that the way the film is composed, it reminded me a lot of last year's nominee for documentary short film Incident.
Yeah.
Because the film
is using a lot of media that already exists,
Exactly.
Right, exactly.
It's sort of reappropriating this footage that is already in existence.
Yeah.
So this isn't a sort of documentary that's going to give you the talking heads or recreations. Right. It's really using a lot of factual material and putting you sort of right in the middle of the situation.
Yeah.
The editing is quite remarkable. A lot of people have talked about it, but I definitely think this is going to be one of the standout documentaries from the entire year.
Yeah.
I completely expect it to be shortlisted among the 15
100%.
and to be in the hunt for the top 5 spots.
Yes.
And I would call it a favorite right now. I will say, this was one of the first films. One of the really a pattern that happened in the festival, unfortunately, is that this is one of the only films to get picked up right away.
Yeah.
Right. And so Netflix picked this up. And that I'm going to say is my worry. Because I think Netflix...
Well, Netflix actually, their documentaries, they do well in this documentary
they
category?
do very well here, even though something like Daughters got left off here, right?
Yeah, it did.
But they do really well here. But there's something about watching this sort of reappropriated footage, I think, in a theater with other people that is quite striking. And I'm afraid that because of the nature of the documentary, it might get sort of lost in the sort of Netflix content realm, and it might not get the moment in film culture that it deserves and that it would have would it come out in a theater, or that, you know, people were to see it in a group. You know, there's something about putting the Netflix N on it that I'm afraid might whittle down its power. I don't know if that's just a presumption of mine. Like you said, Netflix does really well in this category, but the idea that this could have gone to maybe a more high-profile theatrical distribution route, I think would have been even better.
Right. No, I agree with you. Maybe I'm a little bit less skeptical because of, you know, how well Netflix tends to do in that category. You're right, Daughters, which also premiered at Sundance, was very surprisingly left off the list last year. I definitely see the parallels between this film and the short film Incident, which got nominated last year. As you were saying, the way the film is structured, you know, almost entirely out of body cam footage and surveillance footage. There was a lot of parallels with that short film, and it creates quite a striking experience.
Really tense.
Yeah, very tense.
And when it finally hits, it's absolutely, you know, like devastating.
Yeah, 100%. Another film that did really well at Sundance here in this category was Seeds, which is exploring, you know, Black generational farmers in the South. There was a lot of praise for that documentary. Unfortunately, we did not get a chance to see it, but I do wholly expect that film to appear on the shortlist for documentary and to be a very strong contender, as you were saying, to make the final 5.
Absolutely. I believe this is Brittany Shine feature documentary debut. Don't hold me to that, but I believe it is. It's shot in sort of striking black and white, talking about these Black farmers in the United States. It was a very popular film. A lot of great mentions for it. I've been told that it looks absolutely beautiful visually.
Black and white.
Right. And I would totally expect this to be, as you said, shortlisted, possibly in the top 5 at the end. This was a film that was supported by the Sundance Institute. And, you know, we haven't said anything about this yet, but it was the winner of the Grand Jury Prize. And that is an excellent position to be in. I think the door is still open as to who is going to pick this up. And I think multiple people would want to pick it up. So that may give it a little bit of an edge, possibly, depending on who commits to it. But I think whoever commits to it, the film, I think, is ready to be one of the standout documentaries of the year.
Right. And 100% I agree. And along the lines of Selene Los Dinos, documentaries that maybe were a little bit more populist and crowd pleasers, we have the Molly Matlin documentary, Not Alone Anymore. I know that quite a few people liked that documentary. And Andre's an Idiot was actually a winner. It was, I think, the Audience Award winner for this section. And so those two I expect to be films that get picked up eventually.
Actually, Andre is an Idiot is already being backed, I believe, by A24.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense.
Even for that reason alone, I would say it makes it all the much more likely that it is going to land in those 15. And I would watch it be one of the as you said, one of the biggest crowd pleasers in the documentary field this year, picking up a bunch of regional critic mentions all the way to possibly an Oscar nomination. This isn't necessarily a category where A24 does extremely well, but you know they're going to get a foothold on this race eventually. And this has a lot of fans. A lot of fans. And it's a kind of a unique topic, a very unique topic, kind of an interesting topic, I think. So I would not sleep on this. This is another one where I feel very confident this is going to be a top 15 lister.
Yeah, and it's centered around Andre. He's has a diagnosis terminal, and so he's capturing these last moments of life and his experiences and his relationships. And so I think it's that kind of sweet spot where, you know, it's sentimental enough, where people are really responding, audiences, but it's also, I think, centered around this really charming and sort of irresistible character
exactly
at its center, which I think,
this is absolutely going to be one of those films that I believe it's the IDA Awards that has an award for most memorable character in a documentary. I believe it's the International Documentary Association that does list that award. Andre is going to be there for sure. Right. Andre will be there. Right. So it's going to be a very competitive film. I wonder if it could find an audience in theaters. I think it just might. Like I said, I think there was a lot of fans for it.
Well, I think that's one reason that A24 picked it up.
Yeah.
And a documentary that was in this section that you and I got to see and we loved was Predators, which is this deep dive into How to Catch a Predator, the series,
right,
and the sort of, you know, layered experience that is watching that show and watching these perpetrators, you know, get humiliated,
right,
and a lot of very interesting psychological perspectives on, you know, that trauma, not just the trauma of, you know, the show was capturing, but also the trauma of watching that show and watching these predators being captured on Lifetime.
Right.
It's just an absolutely fascinating documentary. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
I loved this movie, and I think it was my favorite film that I saw at Sundance. I thought it was spectacular.
Yeah.
Really thought-provoking, just absolutely fascinating. So up my alley, up your alley. It was such a wonderful film. I don't know that this kind of film kind of really ends up permeating the documentary category that much. But I would love to see it kind of, you know, be able to find its foot in there.
I'm with you. I think this was the best film that I saw at Sundance. It's just so complexly rendered and rendered with so much authenticity.
Yeah.
And I was just really surprised by how much command the director, David Ossett, had on the film. Really, really interesting, thought-provoking stuff. I don't think that this film is going to get as large an audience, unfortunately. I think it probably won't be listed in that 15. It didn't win any prizes, unfortunately, from Sundance. It hasn't been picked up yet, but we were talking about it. This feels like the kind of thing that would feel right at home with Strand Releasing or Kino Lorber. They're going to find success with this film. I think that's the home for this kind of film. Again, they're not necessarily outlets that figure largely every single year in the documentary race. That's why, as excellent as it is, that's why I hesitate, like you, to sort of name it a front runner here.
Right.
So, still a wonderful film.
Yes. And
I mean, Speak, I think also heard really good things about, right? And I think it has sort of this youthful aspect to it and this youthful perspective to it. I think that's going to be unique to the film. It has not been picked up yet, but I would not be surprised to see Netflix include this in its arsenal.
Right.
I could see it becoming very popular on Netflix streaming and possibly figuring into one of those 15 spots as well.
Right. And are there any other documentaries that I think we mentioned the ones that kind of pulled the most attention. I don't know if there are other documentaries you want to mention specifically from this section.
I think from this section, that's it. I would remind listeners that you're dealing with the grand jury prize winner being Seeds and the special jury prize winner being the directing for The Perfect Neighbor, which will be on Netflix. And the audience award went to Andre's an Idiot, which will be released by A24 later this year, I believe.
Correct. And so if we continue on our exploration of the documentaries in this festival, let's go to the World Cinema Documentary Competition.
Right.
And see what titles we were seeing or feeling the most buzz from the festival. Off the top of my head, Prime Minister, about the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, was something that quite a few people I thought were talking about. Right. I think that, was a documentary. I think it might have won the audience
I
award.
think it did win the audience award.
And so,
yeah.
like I said, I think that's the kind of documentary that, a wide group of people respond to.
Yeah. It might find an audience.
Yeah.
It might find an audience. I don't believe it has been picked up yet, but if it is picked up, audience award winner, could definitely find an audience.
I heard quite a few people talk about Mr. Nobody Against Putin, which has a big timeliness with concerning the U.S. Ukrainian relationship, which is going in a very troubling direction as we
and
speak.
The U.S.-Russian relationship as well. Absolutely. Yes. I think that this was another standout from the festival, a standout from the world section. I definitely think this title will be among the 15, and I would not be surprised to see it land among the 5. I don't think that
Interestingly enough, we were talking about it when we were predicting our final Oscar predictions. The last 3 years have had a documentary that is, at least somewhat dealing with this conflict.
Exactly.
Last year there was a surprise of Porcelain War making it in.
Which won the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance.
Yeah. So, that's quite interesting. And so, this topic is something that this documentary branch is certainly
wants to highlight.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And I think this fits right in there, possibly even more pressing now than it's been before with this new administration. But the film is very unique. You have this insider access by this teacher who's able to sort of document how Russia is presenting the invasion on Ukraine to young students. And I think even the director, or he's credited as a co-director, this teacher even stayed on the job to sort of gain access to this footage. Yeah. I've heard it's very fascinating. I cannot wait to watch it. I think that this will be picked up by someone possibly like Magnolia, and it will have a lot of success. So I think we will be hearing this title, Mr. Nobody Against Putin, come up again a lot as the year starts winding down. I think this would be a great moment to segue, however, into another film that's on this section, right? Which is 2,000 Meters to Andreevka.
Right, which is the follow-up of Mstislav Chernov, whose documentary 20 Days in Mariupol won Best Documentary in 2023. And again, I feel this film had a very good reception, and I do expect this film again to be in that shortlisted 15.
Right, absolutely. I absolutely agree that it's going to be there. I think it's going to be there. It could very well get one of those spots. He is a previous winner. This documentary was met with a lot of acclaim as well. A lot of people thought it was quite compelling. Right. I believe, a journey to the front line. Yes. Right. And so it might be interesting to see if there's room for both, right?
Right.
2,000 meters and Mr. Nobody versus Putin. And that's why I bring it up. That's why I said it was a good moment to mention it, because this conflict, again, it's not getting smaller. It's only getting bigger. It's only getting more troubling. Yeah. And case in point, there was enough room in there was enough room in Sundance to spotlight them both, and there was enough appreciation for both. Right. I expect both to make the top 15 and at least one to crack the 5.
Right. And another documentary that made an impact in this category and actually it won the Grand Jury Prize was Cutting Through Rocks, about the first elected councilwoman of an Iranian village who's trying to break patriarchal traditions by trying to teach teenage girls how to ride motorcycles. And that's in an effort to prevent these young girls from entering into these child marriages.
Right.
And so I think that that's a very compelling premise.
Very timely as well.
Very timely. And we unfortunately did not get a chance to see it, but we heard really good things about it. And that just feels like a film that's also destined to make this final crop of documentaries for Oscar voters at the end of the year.
Right. I completely agree. This should be a top 15 film, especially with that Grand Jury Prize. It's important to mention that Sundance, the Oscar documentary branch, doesn't tend to favor one section over the other. They are going to shortlist films from both. Yeah. Almost in equal measure. Yeah. So winning the Grand Jury Prize here is great. The topic is really timely. I think that this would be a no-brainer to include at the year's end.
Right. And then as far as the films that in this category that I thought made the biggest impact, I don't know if there's another film you wanted to mention in particular.
I heard good things about How to Build a Library. Again, I didn't get a chance to see it. And I know that
There's another
The dating
film. There's
game.
actually another film that has a similar topic that's in the
Yes,
premiere
that's
section.
actually really, that I've heard even more about.
Yeah.
But the dating game is kind of interesting because it does have an Oscar-winning producer who's part of the production team, and I believe she was part of the production team for The Edge of Democracy and Virunga and The White Helmets. She's won an Oscar, part of this team, so I don't think you can count it out. I believe it's sort of looking at these eligible bachelors from China who are signing on to this sort of dating service.
Yeah.
But of course, I think it then starts talking about bigger issues in China, right? Possibly the role of masculinity in China, possibly the certain types of power dynamics within couples in China. I can imagine it's going to be very interesting. No one has picked it up yet, but I do think it's of note that it does have an Oscar-winning producer on its team.
Right, 100%. And I think those were the biggest titles to come out of this section, the ones that I think had the most buzz.
Right.
And so now we should move on to the premiere section.
Right. They do list documentaries within the premiere section, so there's a number of documentaries here.
Right. You had Come See Me in the Good Light, which was audience favorite, and it was the winner of the Festival Favorite Award. And about two poets, one of them, Andrea Gibson, who has a terminal cancer diagnosis, and their partner, Megan Fowley.
Yeah.
That was a film that quite a few people
Really
responded to.
popular.
Yes. Yeah. And that director has made another popular film a couple years ago.
That's right.
Goodnight Oppie.
Ryan White, I believe is his name.
Which missed out on a documentary nomination, but had a lot of mentions.
Right.
It was close.
Yeah, and we saw that last year, right, with a bunch of the films that were shortlisted for the Oscar documentary. Remember Ibelin, The Remarkable Life of Ibelin? That filmmaker was coming off The Painter and the Thief. And so the filmmaker of Union was coming off of Crime and Punishment. So I would not be surprised to see Ryan White on the list again this time possibly make it into the final five. I hear it's a very emotional experience and also very rewarding for the audience. For the subject matter, they found it very rewarding.
Right. Middletown, I heard a little bit about from the filmmaker of Boy State and Girl State.
Yeah, the team. Yeah.
Right. About a group of teenagers, I think in New York, and they're doing a student film, and then somehow they uncover a toxic waste conspiracy.
Right.
So that seems that caught a few people's attention.
Yeah, this had its fans. And I will say also that I think this is one of the final productions from Participant Films. So that's kind of interesting too, I thought.
Right. Move Your Body, The Birth of House music. I heard a few people talking about that. It's Never Over by Jeff Buckley. Obviously centered around Jeff Buckley, the late Jeff Buckley.
Right, and you got Amy Berg on that one, who's very popular, and you have Elegance Braddon, I believe, who was just coming off his narrative debut, The Inspection, I believe, in 2022. He's the filmmaker behind Move Your Body. Both of those films had their fans.
Right. Deaf Presidents Now, I believe, in the Deaf University, the world's only deaf university in the 1980s. They're trying to find, I think, a new president for that university. I think that also kind of was a documentary that qualified as a little bit of a crowd pleaser, I think.
Yeah, I think it did have a lot of fans from the people who saw it in Sundance. I spoke to a few people who really liked it. And Davis Guggenheim, also behind that documentary, you're going to recognize him from a film like An Inconvenient Truth, which was nominated. I believe he won for that. And something like Waiting for Superman. So he comes to Sundance all the time, and he's been at the Oscars. Would not be surprised to see this shortlisted either among the 15.
Right. And let's see.
I mean, well, you also had Folk Tales from Heidi Ewing, who's coming off her narrative debut, I believe. I'll Carry You With Me, sort of a hybrid documentary narrative debut.
Which is a great movie.
Wonderful film from the pandemic, 2020. But she's been recognized before for her work on Jesus Camp, I believe, and there were fans for this film. Yeah. Again, a youthful perspective, right? That might be something that helps it stick out. And David France is back. David France directing Free Leonard Peltier, which coming off of a year where we recognized, sort of the incarceration system, and something like I'm Ready Warden got nominated for short documentary film, that may be a timely enough topic, right? So I would not be surprised to see David France show up with this documentary at the end of the year.
And speaking of that topic, the prison system, there's another film in this category called The Alabama Solution from the filmmaker behind Capturing the Freedmans, which is an incredible film, The Alabama Solution.
Right.
And quite a few people were talking about that film. It was very praised, about a group of incarcerated men exposing a cover-up in an Alabama prison. I heard it's a tough watch, but I heard it's a very compelling piece.
Right.
I fully expect that film as well to make an impact.
Yeah, it could make an impact. Questlove is back with his documentary on Sly Stone, and I believe that's already on streaming. But it had a very positive reception, very warm reception. Of course, Questlove coming from his Oscar-winning Summer of Soul, which premiered at Sundance as well. I think also Sally sort of sticks out in this section, right? That's coming from National Geographic, which is sort of always a favorite here. Doesn't always make the 5, but I think you can count on them to make the top 15. And that's going to be on the astronaut Sally Ride and her relationship with Tam O'Shaughnessy. This had a lot of fans as well. And actually, I think this is screening now at South by Southwest as well. So I think it's going to play a few festivals before finally coming out on Nat Geo. But I think being a Nat Geo presentation, it's going to make it very competitive as well.
Right. I also heard a few people talking about The Stringer, which is sort of an investigation into one of the most, or possibly the most iconic photograph from the Vietnam War, and sort of exposing a lot of unseen, unheard of layers to that photograph. That got a good reception from the festival. And speaking of timely matters, The Librarians is a film. I think Sarah Jessica Parker is a producer on that film.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think so. And so that film tackling sort of the crisis that's happening around this country and libraries because of this administration and the right-wing politics sort of surrounding our country at this moment. It's a very timely topic, and I've definitely heard a lot of people talking about it, and I definitely expect this film to make that shortlisted 15 as well.
I mean, it really is a very complete list of films here to sort of represent so many different topics in documentary filmmaking, timely pieces, biographical pieces, interesting angles, interesting characters like Andre. I think the issue here is going to be sort of whittling down all these documentaries with tremendous potential to land in the 15 and possibly the 5. Whittling it down to just 15, I think, is a challenge. I will say that Sundance has been on a tear lately. I think, something like last year, they had 4 documentaries, eventually go and be nominated for Best Documentary. That included Sugarcane, Porcelain War, Black Box Diaries was on the World section, as was Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat. So that's 4 eventual nominees. They had even more films that were shortlisted. And then, in a year like 2022, they also had I think 4 of the eventual nominees. And that included Fire of Love, Navalny, which was the eventual winner, All That Breathes, A House Made of Splinters. And in 2019, they also had 4. They had, I believe, American Factory, The Edge of Democracy, Honeyland was very popular there.
Yeah.
That was 2019. And in 2020, they had Summer of Soul. They had Flea, which got multiple nominations across various categories. And they had Riding with Fire. I think most recently their lowest year is 2023 when they got 2 documentaries in the final 5. Again, more were shortlisted. But those were 20 Days in Mariupol, which ended up winning again. It won the Audience Award, I believe, that year. And The Eternal Memory, which we had seen there as well. And that won the Grand Jury Prize in the World section. So I do expect somewhere between at least 2, possibly as many as 4 nominees to come out of here. And I will say that a film that wins the Grand Jury Prize is in really, really, really strong position. You look at a film, as I said, The Eternal Memory won this. Riding with Fire, I believe, won this. And so you have to really believe that a film like Cutting Through Rocks, which won the Grand Jury Prize on the World section, is in a really strong position, as is the winner of the Grand Jury Prize on the U.S. section, Seeds. So I think we have a bunch of really competitive films here. And I mean, I don't know if you agree with me, but my gut says Seeds, The Perfect Neighbor, Cutting Through Rocks.
Yeah.
Those films are really at the top.
Yeah.
Then followed closely by something like Andre's an Idiot. I think Sally is going to have a very good shot.
Yeah.
Right.
I agree 100%. Those would be my top picks as well.
The Librarians also might be
The Librarians, yes.
one to watch out for.
Yes.
Yeah. And of course, she was recently nominated.
Yes, she was recently nominated for short film for Death by Numbers. Yes.
Yeah. So she's coming fresh off a nomination. She may actually repeat.
Yeah. Or it may affect also.
Or maybe, possibly.
And now we're going to segue into the narrative features that were included in Sundance this year.
Right. And just for a little bit of background, there's been a lot of criticism sort of levied at Sundance this year with their selection of films. There are a lot of outlets that are dismissing this year as a less competitive year in terms of films that premiered and have, very rich futures, not just in terms of how well they do with critics and how well they do with audiences, but certainly how well they do with Oscar voters. I want to say on the record that I'm completely against that opinion. I think it was a very strong lineup. I think you had a lot of really standout films. And I think you have a handful of films here that absolutely have a very strong future for the Oscars, even though it's several months down the line. I think they're very strong projects with very strong prospects. And I think also some people are being too quick to dismiss the idea that, Sundance isn't what it used to be, which is, again, a saying that I absolutely hate because Sundance is so necessary to this industry and certainly to the American side of this industry. It's a place where filmmakers go to sort of announce themselves, and that's a tradition that is not only necessary, but that should be, I think, absolutely championed and encouraged. And if anything, I think Sundance could do a better job of retaining some of those filmmakers to have them premiere more work here on another section. But I do think it was a strong lineup. And the reality is that even if you look at last year, this is where A Real Pain sort of set its first flag, right, into what was eventually 2 nominations and a win for supporting actor. And even something like A Different Man premiered here, which won a Golden Globe for Sebastian Stan, would have been nominated for Sebastian Stan, I firmly believe, had he not had The Apprentice, and certainly helped Sebastian Stan get nominated for The Apprentice, right, and was nominated for Best Makeup at the Oscars. And so we're sort of in a little bit of a record here where there's at least going to be one Sundance movie that is going to cross over and get
above the line
nominations. Usually more than one. Again, if you look at A Real Pain, above the line, supporting actor, original screenplay, A Different Man in makeup. Before that, you have something like Past Lives, right? Which again, picture, an original screenplay, was very competitive for actress. You have Coda, of course, which was the eventual winner, right? In something like 2022, you had Living, right? That finally got Bill Nye 9 for Best Actor, 9 for Best Screenplay. So there is at least going to be one. I don't know that we're in the days where a film like Get Out and Call Me By Your Name and Manchester by the Sea sort of premiere here and sort of grab the industry attention. I think, unfortunately, there's just a lot of power being put right now in Cannes, and a lot of films are trying to wait till Cannes to premiere. We talked about that in our final episode of season 1, which is that, after Nora, again, Sean Baker, a staple of Sundance at some point, right? Sort of starts premiering films in Cannes. He doesn't really come back very often. I think we're at this moment in the industry and for Oscar voters where there's just a lot of power in Cannes, certainly for international voters. I think it's too much power, but I certainly expect a couple of films, 2 or 3 films, to translate to Oscar voters. And even if you look at something like last year, right, where we had A Real Pain and A Different Man on the narrative side, there were a lot of titles that I thought were competitive. So after Sundance, everyone had The Outrun pegged as a surefire actress nominee for Saoirse Ronan, and possibly a competitive title for adapted screenplay. And I think something that's important to talk about here, because people have been sort of levying this criticism for the quality of films sort of excusing why a lot of them haven't been picked up yet. I think you look at The Outrun, and that's a film that should have been nominated for more Oscars, would have been nominated for more Oscars. I just think that not the right person didn't buy it, and they didn't push it well. You know, this is a studio or distributor that had other titles like I'm Still Here. And so I think that the reason why you're seeing a lot of these titles not picked up yet is just because the market is so volatile right now. And I've always been someone who champions that what needs to occur is we need to have more small distributors. You know, we're in a time where, because you have the studios basically reluctant to distribute anything with a brain,
Risk,
or with a heart, anything that's risky, or anything that's, dare I say, adult or mature or not a piece of spectacle, that you need to have more boutique distributors. You need to have more A24s, more Neons, more Janus films. And I think that's where the future is places like Metrograph getting bigger, places like Magnolia getting bigger. And I think it's necessary. And I think that's why the market is slow right now, is because then what happens is you have Sony Classics pick up all these films. They don't necessarily know what to do with all of them. They don't market them well. And, you know, some of these titles, I think, from last year could have been more competitive. Something like My Old Ass, which got honored for a Writers Guild Award, could have been more competitive in that category had it not been picked up by Amazon, which doesn't really know what it's doing in terms of campaigning for accolades and awards and an eventual Oscar nomination. I think the same could be said about something like Will and Harper. Might have had better prospects had it not been a Netflix film. And so I think that's what has to happen, is more boutique studios have to pop up. The ones that already exist have to get stronger. And I think that it's bad to have Neon buy a bunch of films that they then do not know how to release, nor do they care to release really well, because they're just waiting for Cannes. I would say the same thing about A24. I'd say the same thing about Sony Classics. It would be better for all these films and for the industry in general to have more boutique distributors who are going to give each of these films sort of the time and attention they require, because I honestly do believe so many of them are locked and loaded, ready to compete for an Oscar, ready to compete for voters' attentions, and ready to capture an audience. I really do think that.
Right.
So I don't think that this is going to be, for example, a year like 2018, where you had essentially no Sundance titles walk out with a nomination. But I think what happened there was that the titles that were eligible were too niche. I mean, you're talking about one of the most championed films that year, famously, was Hereditary, with Toni Collette, almost, getting the lion's share of all the Actress Regional Critics Awards. But it's going to be such a difficult sell as a first film, even with a previous nominee like Toni Collette. You talk about Bo Burnham, who made a classic with Eighth Grade. He wasn't able to get in. A24, I think, had a tough year that year. You look at someone like Carey Mulligan for Wildlife, who hadn't been nominated, I think, a second time yet. Who would be nominated 2 years after that, I believe. And so I almost feel like it was too spread out, and there was no film that was, I think, popular enough to get multiple nominations. Because if you look at that, that's a trend here. If you look at Past Lives, it's 2. A Real Pain, it's 2. Living, it's 2. And they're great when it comes to acting and screenplay. Sometimes some text will get in, as you saw with Different Man. But I definitely think that what happened in 2018 is not going to play out this year.
Right.
Because I think that there are films with enough potential in multiple categories.
Right. I think that's really well said, and I completely agree with you on all those points. Very well said. I will say that, let's see, looking at the U.S. dramatic competition section, there are a few films that stand out here. Let's see, the biggest one being Sorry Baby, which was, I think, captured the most of the attention from this section. And I would say a film that captured, among the films that captured the most attention of the festival period. From Eva Victor, it's her directorial debut. She also wrote it. The film won the Screenwriting Award, which I believe is the same award that I believe, A Real Pain won.
Yep, same one.
Right. And we did get the chance to see this film. I did think it was among the stronger films I saw at the festival. I thought that had a lot of strengths. It's certainly a very particular singular voice that we're hearing from for the first time from Eva Victor. I think you can really feel that in the piece.
A lot of people are already comparing her to someone like Greta Gerwig,
Yeah.
or Phoebe, right, from
Yeah.
from Fleabag.
Yeah. She has the kind of voice that sort of strikes that middle ground between, humor and also some, really sort of distinct melancholy. And the film as a whole, I think, has this undercurrent of melancholy that
Yeah, it does.
I find interesting. But it also feels like a very low key film. I don't know about you, but it's the world it's depicting, the setting. It feels very low key, more so than I would say a film like, let's say, Greta Gerwig's directorial debut, Lady Bird. The filmmaking style reminded me a lot of one of my favorite filmmakers, which is Dan Sallet. In a way, there's something kind of very bare about the piece, very stripped back, sort of like micro budget, very sort of simple, straightforward micro budget sort of kind of storytelling. And I thought that was interesting. Again, I love Dan Sallet's films, and I see that there was a lot of promising things about this debut. And I can see why people were responding so emphatically to it as well. It's a singular voice from Ava Victor, and just broadly, she's also acting in the film, and her character is undergoing a traumatic experience and the fallout of that traumatic experience. And I think it also has it's a personal story for this filmmaker as well, and I think you can feel that in the piece too. That's one of its strengths, in my opinion.
No, I completely agree. I echo everything you've said. I do think that this is the kind of film where if you were to take away Ava Victor's name, or if Ava Victor's name was more known already within the industry, like Greta Gerwig, I think that this film would be locked and loaded. I think this is an easy pickup for anyone. I think it's an easy campaign. Not an easy campaign, but it should be a formidable campaign. It's, I think, a very poignant movie. I definitely think she is going to possibly get the large share of, any accolade that has to do with breakout filmmaker
Right.
or first film. I worry sometimes about where we're at as an industry because I want her to have the opportunity to make more films. I'm worried that she's going to be either co-opted into writing something for a studio, which is impersonal and would be, I think, a step back. I think for us as audience members who want to see more films from her point of view. And sometimes I worry that they're going to put her into a TV show like they did with Lena Dunham. And I think that sometimes isn't the best thing that could happen to
a
filmmaker who is really showing a distinct singular voice. I think Girls was wonderful, but I do think that Lena Dunham belongs on the big screen.
Right.
So I do worry about that, but I do think that the film has the legs to get nominated for original screenplay. I would not be surprised if it turns into something bigger either. Like I said, if you were to take the exact same film and when you were to put Greta Gerwig starring in it, and this being Greta Gerwig's debut feature, I think the prospects would be much brighter only because Greta Gerwig is more known. This is coming from Pastel, which gave us After Sun, right? And they found success there, getting Paul Mescal nominated. Of course, they gave us Moonlight. A24 picked it up really quick, and they have a relationship with Pastel, so that's not surprising. Big Beach is also in here, and they've made films that have found audiences and have found some love from Oscar voters and end-of-year accolades and things like that. So I don't think that's the problem. I think sort of her anonymity would be the most difficult hurdle. But if you watch the film, I think you're going to be touched by it. And as the year sort of progresses and it becomes clear, as always happens, that you think you're going to have, quote unquote, better, stronger, more
Right.
appealing movies than what you see at first.
Right.
That most of the time does not happen. And you can talk to Coda about that. You know, most of the time, these movies that stand out here will continue standing out and will actually only get better, I think, in your memory, you know, as the year progresses, and they have opportunities to sort of impress. So you never know if something like Sorry Baby is going to find an audience, a wide audience in theatrical, and that might just be the last push that it needs. But when I see that screenplays do really well coming out of Sundance, I think this is one of the biggest screenplays to keep an eye on,
Right.
at the very least.
Right. I would say that I differ from you in certain aspects, in that for me, the feel of the film is just too, you know, kind of, again, stripped back, micro budget, that for me, I'm not sure right now, even though it was among the films that I most responded to at Sundance, I'm not sure right now that I see it as a film that I feel sure is going to break through in such a big way. There's a polish to a real pain that I don't think is in this film just yet. And for some reason, when I think about this film and I think about A24 buying this film, I certainly don't think of something like After Sun, which was a masterpiece in my opinion. I feel more something like Last Black Man in San Francisco, or from San Francisco. In this really beautiful, lovely film. It came out in 2019 that was bought by A24, but it had a very low level kind of release, very select theaters, mostly on demand, at least during the 2019 landscape. And it was a very worthwhile film. It had a lot of praise from critics, but it was just operating on a much lower register. Again, I think that there's a little bit more polish in that film too. At least visually, it was a grander film. The cinematography in that movie, for example, Last Black Man from San Francisco. And I just feel like, again, this film is operating on a much lower register where I'm not 100% sure or confident that it's going to break in, even with an A24 acquisition and Pastel behind it. I don't know. That's sort of what I'm feeling right now. Again, it's carried by, the strength of the promising potential of this filmmaker. I'm just not 100% sold yet that that's a surefire contender for something like screenplay.
So for me, this is going to be the overarching theme as we keep talking about these narrative films. It's not the films that have sort of these shortcomings. They have these weak points, these Achilles heels. Every film has it, even the film that eventually wins, whether it's Nora or Conclave or Coda, Power of the Dog, whatever. Every film has its weaknesses and it has its strengths. It always comes down, in my opinion, to the campaign. So there's really no very big reason for The Last Black Man in San Francisco to get 0 nominations and Minari to walk away with 5 nominations, other than the campaign just was not there. And so in my opinion, the biggest hurdle that Sorry Baby is going to have is that it is A24. And as we know, they're going to have a stacked slate of critically acclaimed films that are going to play in more popular, as I said, more powerful festivals in Sundance, like Cannes right now. And that is going to be a difference maker. I don't think A24, as we saw last year, is going to be good at getting more than 2 or 3 films nominated throughout all of the Academy Awards.
Right.
And as soon as the blue list shows up, then Sing Sing is going to have a problem being nominated for very many, right?
Right.
And sort of, Sing Sing gets, its trial is the theatrical market. It sort of flopped, and that left an opening, and they weren't going to sit and wait for Sing Sing to make a comeback, even though they scheduled it for a re-release. No, we both know that wasn't going to happen. They were going to jump on the quickest pony that would take them to a Best Picture nomination, and they did that with success. But so, in my opinion, it's not that these films sort of are more low-key and will be less embraced. It's that they're not going to be campaigned to the same degree. So if you campaign this movie, like Last Black Man in San Francisco, as passionately as you campaign Minari, then it should really have no problem getting the 2 nominations of Past Lives. Now, I will say something like After Sun, which again suffered because Everything Everywhere All at Once is there, right? Unlike After Sun, I do think that something like Sorry Baby is it's singular, but still conventionally told film. I do think that there is more of an artistic bend the After Sun, which maybe was less accessible to some voters. I don't think that's Sorry Baby, but at the same time, I don't want to position it as, Sorry Baby. I'm sorry for the comparison, but I mean it as a compliment. I don't want to sort of align it with Tiny Furniture either, right? Where it's a very singular take and it's such a wonderful voice, but it's not necessarily the thing that is going to be most poignant to viewers. I think this is an incredibly moving story, right? Not just a great voice, but a story that's going to reach a lot of people and it's going to be very moving. And I know that there are going to be people in the industry, the higher ups, actresses who are going to be dying to work with her, and are going to be big fans of this film in particular. And so to me, it comes down to the campaign. And already it sort of starts, in the back only because it's A24. And so if A24 focuses, I think absolutely you can have the past live nominations here as well. Now, if they get distracted and go elsewhere, then I think obviously you could see it not get any nominations, sort of like Bo Burnham did with 8th Grade.
Right.
So can they stay focused? Will they be committed?
Right. I know. I think those are really good points that you bring up. Again, I'm just not fully seeing it just yet, but I think I think that those are definitely worthwhile points to sort of chew on as to why something might or might not happen in this particular case. A film in this group that did really well for audiences was Twinless. We did see that film. I quite liked this movie. It was very enjoyable, very charming. And I'm a big fan of this filmmaker. We saw their first film, Straight Up, on Netflix, I believe. And we liked, again, his voice and his sort of perspective. And I think he just continues that trajectory in this film. And he just, I feel, is gifted at making a very, entertaining, charming vehicles. And this is no exception. I do think this is the best performance I've seen yet from Dylan O'Brien, who gets a chance to really flex some muscles here, some acting muscles, I mean. And I think he does a wonderful job here. And I just thoroughly enjoyed this piece. And it's no surprise why most people did enjoy it as well. And again, this was the Audience Award winner.
Yeah, Audience Award winner, special jury prize for Dylan O'Brien.
Yeah.
You got great mentions. James Sweeney, I think, is a filmmaker of our time. Actually, I don't hate the Lena Dunham comparison again, and I mean it as a compliment. Someone who's really sort of at the pulse of young members of society, young moviegoers. And so I don't think that this is the film that's going to take him to any sort of, big awards night or a lot of accolades at the end of the year, but it is another step to getting there. Not unlike someone like Cooper Raiff, again, who was here in the festival with a TV project. But again, these voices that are going to form over time, I just want to stress the idea that I think it's great that James Sweeney got another film.
Right.
And I want to see a third film of his.
Right.
I don't want to see him co-opted into writing Spider-Man, whatever.
Right.
And I don't want to see him sort of forced onto TV. Like I said, I just don't know if the future is there. I think it was too much of a hiatus for Lena Dunham in her return to the big screen. All those years on Girls, again, wonderful program, but I want to see her on the big screen. And again, Phoebe, I think Phoebe belongs on the big screen. She should write and direct for the big screen. That's where we need her.
Right. Interesting thing about Lena Dunham, I feel that she's had a little bit of a resurgence with some of her recent film projects. And I think you're right. I think we lost a little bit of her during the Girls program, which I think started off strong, but it kind of went downhill. I think the start of that show had its strengths, but, I was less enthused with some of the later seasons. And then you see her again, becoming more of a force as a female filmmaker. And I think that's really nice to see.
I mean, when you see,
100% agree with you.
When you see Catherine Called Birdie, you realize, damn, we missed at least two really good Lena Dunham films between, Tiny Furniture and Catherine Called Birdie, because she was making that show. And again, all power to you, to make whatever sort of art you want to make, but it is at the expense of the cinema, right? It's the cinema's loss.
Right. And
so I really think that Lena Dunham, and even someone like Greta Gerwig, who I think is getting too co-opted into making these giant blockbusters, I'm sure she's going to have a wonderful take on the Chronicles of Narnia, and it's going to be, a step forward in her career and her artistic sort of repertoire, and I'm sure it's going to be wonderful. But I would really love to see her, make another original film.
Right. Yeah. Another film that won a jury prize, special jury award for ensemble cast was Plain Clothes, which we did get the chance to see, and some people were talking about this film as well. It has this '90s vibe. It's shot on film. It certainly gives off hardcore '90s vibes. About an undercover officer who's trying to lure and arrest, gay men for public indecency. I like this film. I thought there were virtues of this film. And it was a good outing for Carmen Emmy, his first film. And I particularly enjoyed the two leads, Tom Blythe and
Russell,
who I love, Russell Tovey. Some people were talking about that film. Let's see. What did you think?
Well, I was a big fan of the film as well. Wonderful first film. Again, I'm not sure it's going to have the broad support it needs to go beyond, mentions for first film. This is a surefire Independent Spirit Award nominee, and I say that with the highest
Right.
regard and the highest compliment. The best televised award.
I'm a little surprised.
Very good film.
I am a little surprised since we were talking about Twinless, and this goes back to a point you were making earlier very strongly about distribution and acquisition. This film, Twinless, as charming as it is, I'm surprised it doesn't have a U.S. distributor.
I believe
quite
it's
yet.
Republic Pictures who have picked
Are
up
they
the
distributing
world.
it?
That's what IMDb says. They've picked up worldwide rights.
Okay.
And so, unfortunately, I think this is going on streaming.
Yeah.
But I think, again, James Sweeney is for theatrical. A movie like Twinless is to see with an audience. I think that's the next step for him. And I think it's in the offing. I think 3 or 4 years' time, he will be in theaters.
Right. Plain Clothes does not have a distributor, but I feel like that film could really fit in Strand Releasing's.
I have no idea what Strand Releasing is waiting for here. I really do not.
Another film that we saw was actually ended up being quite a big film because it won the dramatic competition grand jury prize, was Atropia, which has a very interesting premise of a sort of, faux Iraq sort of setting that's being used so that incoming soldiers can sort of, exercise and practice
Run.
before they enter the, quote unquote, real thing. It's a sharp comedy. It's a sharp satire. I liked the film. I enjoyed watching it. I thought there were parts of it that I thought were quite interesting and thought-provoking. And also I laughed quite a bit. And so I quite enjoyed it. I think critics were more mixed on it. It did end up winning the competition, the special jury prize. I think people were surprised by that. And no one has bought this film either.
I'm not surprised that no one has bought it. This is hands down the biggest surprise for me at Sundance. I absolutely adored this film. Alia Shawkat and a great ensemble cast. You just bust a gut for an hour plus. It's wonderful. It's wonderfully made. It's wonderfully shot, wonderfully edited. Again, a great ensemble. I cannot wait to see what else this filmmaker makes. Haley Gates. I'm so happy that it won the grand jury prize. The fact that it doesn't have, again, a distributor speaks more to what I will call the cowardice of the market right now. And maybe some reluctance of audience members to go and, try to discover something new or experience something new, because this isn't, a conventional story by any means, nor is it conventionally told by any means, but it is so worthwhile, so worthwhile.
Right.
I hope it gets a theatrical release. I'm thinking Magnolia. I don't think Magnolia should sleep on this. I think they could have a success here. So that's what my gut says.
Right.
If not, IFC, I think, to me, this is an absolute classic. I cannot wait to see this again.
Other films that we caught here, we did see Sunfish and Other Stories on Green Lake. I quite liked that. It was, sort of an episodic film, but it was told really...
Anthology film, I think.
Yeah, an anthology film, excuse me. It was told really sincerely, and I was quite moved by it. And so I enjoyed watching that film.
Another great ensemble, Joanna Hogg is part of the production
I was really
team
excited
there.
to see that.
Wonderfully made. I think also one of our favorites. Another great ensemble, beautifully shot.
Right.
Really promising filmmaker.
Right.
Again, no one has bought this, but again, they're just sleeping on it because maybe they're afraid of the market. They're certainly risk averse, but you look at what Magnolia was able to do with Thelma, and I think it just speaks to the possibilities here of when a distributor really can sort of tap into what's going to speak to an audience.
Right.
And I think this coming of age story was absolutely wonderful.
Right. We also saw Ricky, which, personally I was a little bit let down by. It's a very compelling story about a 30-year-old man who's coming out of incarceration and adapting to life. He's been incarcerated since he was a young man. So there's very interesting dynamic that's playing out of sort of missing your, growing up hood and having to just adapt to adulthood right away. I don't feel like the film really delivered on its premise too much for me, but it was a very interesting story. I think some people did like that film.
It actually won, I believe, the Best Director prize on the special jury. So that's great. And of course, Stephen James is a really wonderful actor, really underrated actor, does a wonderful job here, as does Sheryl Lee Ralph in a supporting turn.
Right. I liked Love Brooklyn, about this sort of relationship triangle between a man and two women, but there's something very breezy about the piece and very accessible and also very honest. And so I liked that movie. I didn't hear a lot of talk about it though.
Unfortunately, no. This was another one that I really enjoyed. Just again, wonderful, wonderful actors. You have Andre Holland, Nicole Beharie, DeWanda Wise, a great group of actors. I thought it was beautifully shot and wonderfully edited. I really look forward to what this filmmaker makes next. And I believe that there's something really interesting about it, because I believe the screenplay wasn't specifically written for this group of cast nor this director, but it was written a while ago. And the sort of artists, maybe Andre Holland, sort of came to the script and they sort of made it their own. And I thought it was a very authentic, sincere film. And again, I can really see this finding an audience.
Another film we caught was Bunny Lover, about a Chinese American cam girl. And I believe Rachel Sennett is involved as a producer in that. She's also in the film for a little bit. And this cam girl gets involved in this sort of relationship with this guy over cam. Kind of goes a little bit awry. I felt this film had some potential. And I liked some of the things it was doing, but overall, I think it felt a little bit, it didn't quite meet its potential. And I think some people were critical of the piece as well.
I mean, I liked the actors in it, and I did think that she did get some sincerity from her cast. And I do think the piece was well cast as well.
And moving on to the World Cinema Dramatic Competition, there are a few films here that I think really stood out. Among them was DJ Amit, which was the winner of the Special Jury Prize.
And the Audience Award.
And this film, I actually heard quite a lot of people talking about. I heard it was a crowd pleaser. Unfortunately, I did not get the chance to see it. It's about a young 15-year-old boy in North Macedonia who's in love with music and is sort of using music as a way to navigate, a conservative community. And I think he also is in the throes of finding his first love. So this film did really well. And I expect that it's going to be a crowd pleaser for many festivals to come. I believe that it's going to be a film that's going to pop up in many other festivals. Let's see. I heard quite a bit about Cactus Pears, which I think was just announced as a film that's going to be part of the New York New Directors New Films Festival, which is a festival that we love. A great festival. It's really a nice thing to be, accepted into that festival. And this is a queer story taking place in India, an Indian film between a 30-something man who falls in love with another Indian man from the countryside while
grieving his father, I believe.
Grieving his father. And so I heard spectacular things about that. I expect that we'll be hearing more about it as well. Two Women is a Canadian film about, these two women and sort of I think it's a friendship between them. And one of them is about to engage in a love affair or infidelity and, using something like that to sort of start over, start a new chapter, sort of possibly exercise some demons. This is a film that I heard quite a bit about, and it's also a film that I think is going to be playing at other festivals as well. And it did win a special jury award for writing. Also, there's the Turkish film "The Things You Kill," which I heard a lot of people were talking about. I heard people were saying that it's a surefire contender for best foreign film, which is interesting. And I think a man is dealing with the death of his mother, and I think he enlists a farmer to help him enact some kind of act of vengeance. So I heard quite a bit about that movie.
The filmmaker, I believe, is actually Iranian, and I think his previous film, Terrestrial Verses, was well noted in 2023, I believe, and I think that was On Certain Regard in Cannes. And so he's starting to develop a little bit more of a filmography with possibly international voters. So I think you're right. It would not surprise me at all to see this being selected for it is a co-production for some countries pick for international film.
Right.
And well, there was also The Virgin of Quarry Lake, which is, I believe, a co-production, but it's taking place in Argentina based on, I believe, a couple of short stories from this Argentinian writer, and I believe it's a bit of a coming-of-age story with these sort of these teenage girls and their relationship with this sort of boy that they're infatuated with. I think that had its fans. Again, I do think that in the world cinema section, you'll see less crossover from Sundance in terms of the bigger awards, but you're going to see a lot of selections here for international film. These films will, a large number of them will end up representing some kind of country. So I would not be surprised to see Argentina electing The Virgin of Quarry Lake. I think
Canada electing 2 women.
Yes, Canada possibly electing 2 women. I certainly think my gut says that the UK is going to pick Cactus Pears to represent the UK. And DJ Ahmet and The Things You Kill are interesting, right?
The co-productions, but also they have that Turkish background. I don't know if Turkey will actually submit them. I wonder if North Macedonia might select DJ Ahmet, and if The Things You Kill might end up being selected by something possibly like from France, maybe, or Poland. I've heard very good things about it. Yeah.
Maybe even Turkey. I don't know. I have to see what Turkey selections in the past have been, but I think it might be a bit edgy for them. I'm not sure. But I expect a lot of the films that you just mentioned to be selected to represent a country competing for international feature.
Yeah, and we did see a film on this section called Lose, that is a Hong Kong China production, starring in a small part Isabelle Huppert, but unfortunately for the filmmaker Flora Lau, I think she's had some kind of presence in Cannes. At some point, I think one of her films was in the Un Certain Regard section in 2013. But unfortunately, it was a little bit of a disappointment for me. I don't think it fully reached what it was going for.
And if we look at the midnight section, a couple of titles that stand out. I mean, unfortunately, the reception for Opus wasn't very good, and it's hitting theaters soon. So we'll see if it's able to find an audience with moviegoers. Together actually was a standout here at Sundance. I think the audience ate it up. We saw it, I think, in the midnight premiere.
We saw it on the premiere, yeah.
Yeah, the actors were there. The director was there. They ate it up, I think. And it was actually one of the titles that sold really quickly. I think Neon picked it up.
I think it sold for the highest price from the festival thus far.
I think Neon sees a lot of, possibility in the marketplace for a film that's sort of, a horror, but sort of a horror comedy, and
body
also
horror.
a body horror.
Post the Substance.
Right, Post the Substance. I think that was one of the headlines, right? People were talking about how the Substance had made it a market that was anxious to get their hands on horror films and release it to audiences. I don't know when they plan on releasing this, Neon, and I think, again, Neon has that same A24 problem, which is they're going to focus in on 1 or 2 movies at the expense of all the other ones. We'll see if Together benefits from that or suffers from that. Again, it's a comedy, right? It's a horror, but it's also a comedy. I think this could find an audience in the US, and I think that's what Neon is banking on.
Right. We saw the film. I thought there were some things about it that I quite liked. I do think it's a film that, again, the audience completely ate up. It had a very good
Yeah.
reception from the crowd, and I think there's potential for it to do well, as you were saying, at the box office. However, you know, I don't know. I don't know if you can replicate something like The Substance. I mean, this is very different from The Substance, besides the body horror element aspect to it. But I don't know if they're going to be able to replicate that same success.
Right.
Personally, I don't think it has as much, for lack of a better term, substance to sort of
Right.
carry it over, into that sort of territory.
Right.
But I think it could do well.
I don't think I'm seeing any awards prospects here, but I think that if Neon plays its cards right, they could maybe have a success on their hands here, like Longlegs. With the campaign they rolled out for that.
Maybe.
I would certainly not wait for October or certainly the end of the year. I think this is a good summer movie. Actually, you're gonna get a lot of good summer money from this.
Right. And moving on to the next section, which usually has a group of interesting films.
Right.
East of Wall, about a horse trainer, her ranch. It's a refuge that also functions as a refuge for wayward teenagers. I think people quite like that one. I think it won the audience award at this section.
Yeah, it did.
And it also was bought, interestingly enough, by Sony Picture Classics.
Yeah.
Which is a very good acquisition team to have. Another title that quite a few people were talking about, as being probably the most Sundance-y title out there, which is By Design, where a woman switches bodies with that of a chair.
Yeah.
Juliette Lewis. Actually had sort of a mixed response, but I didn't get a chance to see it, but I was actually very surprised by the amount of people who actually found something really kind of interesting about the piece.
Yeah.
And I heard it's shot really beautifully, and that the film again has more pros than cons.
Yeah.
Let's see, another film I heard about in this section was Mad Bills to Pay, or Destiny Dire que no soy malo, about a Brooklyn man sort of navigating his teenage girlfriend, and hustling through the Bronx, trying to get by. So I did feel that this kind of was a crowd pleaser for a lot of people. I think it won an award here. I heard quite a bit about that movie. I heard a bit about the Zodiac Killer Project, which is sort of this furthering this further examination of the Zodiac Killer. I think that film had some fans, and Reigns Over Babel, I think, had some fans too.
Yeah, some people at Sundance really liked that film as well. I think from a Colombian filmmaker, first film, I believe. All those films, I think, have their fans, and some of them even have, buyers who are willing to sort of take the risk and release them to major audiences. And I think some will even find some success there. But I do think that those films in general are going to have a tough time finding an angle into the award season, whether it's end of the year accolades or certainly anything sort of broadcast, and eventually Oscars. I think the title that has really stuck in people's minds, and we've spoken about it at length, is Sorry Baby. I think the future is bright there. I think the other title that does not get mentioned enough that we have yet to talk about, which I think is really important, is Omaha, right?
Right.
It does not get mentioned enough as a movie that has so much potential to crash that race, right?
We saw this film. I loved this movie. I think it's really well done. It's very moving. It's very touching. It's a feature debut, and it stars John Manjaro, who's been having an incredible last few years.
He's always great.
He's always terrific. Just last year, he was September 5. The year before that, he was absolutely phenomenal, in my opinion, in Past Lives.
So it's just a matter of time before John Manjaro gets recognition.
Exactly. A beautiful actor, very talented actor, and he gets an incredible part here and does a beautiful job. He really breaks your heart by the end of it. The film is taking place during the financial crash, about a father and his daughter and his son undergoing this road trip. And it's going to be revealed later on in the film what the intent of the road trip is. Again, John Manjaro is absolutely beautiful here. The young actress who plays the daughter, I thought, was just stellar. She is so gifted, very pure, very natural talent. And it's just a very moving film. It's very well done, and very tender and intimate and, powerful. And so I thought,
Absolutely.
I don't think enough people talk about this movie. I'm very surprised that it doesn't have a buyer.
Yes,
I would think that this would be a film that some studio or some smaller boutique studio would see as a horse in this race.
absolutely. I would blame this again on the marketplace. I would blame this on the cowardice, the risk adverse distributors. But I absolutely think I'm shocked that this hasn't yet to be picked up. To me, this kind of reads like when Bleecker picked up Mass, remember in 2021?
Right.
I think that Bleecker would have tried campaigning this and they may have had some success. Certainly something like Sony Picture Classics, I think could have picked this up or could potentially still pick this up. I think it would be a strong film to add to its repertoire, even though again, it's Sony Picture Classics is sort of specializing more and more in these foreign films. If you look at something like The Outrun, but I think this film has tremendous potential. I think that young actress could definitely get a lot of mentions for her breakout performance, and of
so
course,
good.
John Margaro is fantastic in this.
Yeah.
I'm gonna repeat what I said, which is the idea that the film again, not unlike Sorry Baby, I think is locked and loaded with what it delivers, right? What it sets out to deliver and what it accomplishes. So that if you were to put a more established name on it, right? If it was not a directorial feature debut, right? If this was, I'm looking at the list now, if this was presented by Ira Sachs, the future would be much brighter, right? Because there is that bias, right? But without the bias of the name filmmaker behind the film is incredibly strong. And I think all it needs is the right distributor to A, find an audience, and B, sort of coax that into a nomination for screenplay, certainly for John Margaro. So I'm hopeful that someone's going to, smarten up and pick this up soon.
Yeah. I really liked that film. And like you said, I think those were the two biggest takeaways from this section with regard to future Oscar prospects.
But now moving on to the premiere section, I think we're going to find a couple more films there that stick out, and certainly what I would call the heavy favorites here. Let's start with a film called Lurker, right? Which was one of the few films to definitely get distribution via Mubi, right?
Yeah.
A Mubi finally breaking out last year with The Substance. But I'm not sure they're going to find the same type of success here that they did with The Substance. They have a couple movies that they're going to release here. I just think it's more, catering to their great audience that they have on streaming. I think that's what this is for. But it had some really great notices, especially for its actors, right?
Yeah. This is a film I was very disappointed to have missed. I really wanted to see this film. Hearing that Mubi acquired it is great. It seems right up their alley. It seems right up my alley. It's the kind of film I would love. This man, played by a actor who I think has a French background, Theodore Pellerin, who is a very strong actor, who sort of gets infatuated, I think, and sort of wiggles his way into the world of a musical artist, I believe, played by Archie Madekwe, Madekwe. And he, I remember him from having a pivotal part in Saltburn.
Right? He's been breaking out.
Right. And so those two actors, I think, had a lot of mentions from this film, a lot of acclaim. And I think this was a film that I think really did well. We heard a lot about it when we were at the festival.
Yeah.
People who kind of said, it was an experience watching it. It was kind of a cringe fest in a way, but in a good way.
A lot of people mentioned Ingrid Goes West.
Yes, kind of like that. Yes, and I really love Ingrid Goes West.
Great film.
I love that film. And so, I think this film has a little bit more of a dramatic bent to it than Ingrid Goes West. Possibly, it's not as comedic, I think. But I think that it sounds absolutely spectacular. I can't wait to see it. And that was a film that was talked about. I'm glad Mubi got it.
Yeah, I think another title worth mentioning here is All That's Left of You, right? Which is directed by Sherian Davis. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. But I certainly remember her from her wonderful film in 2009, I believe, Amrika,
yeah.
Which I believe went to Sundance as well. She's working on TV for a little bit, and she even stars in this film. But it's sort of a film that's talking about, I think, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, so it couldn't be more timely. Has yet to be picked up, but it had a lot of really good ink coming out of the festival. I think there were even some musings about this film possibly being selected to represent a country in the international feature race, and that's why I bring it up. Like those other films that we talked about in the World Dramatic section, I wouldn't be surprised if All That's Left of You is chosen to represent one country, because I think it is a co-production among the international feature race. To me, again, this is another title that, again, it should be picked up already. It just speaks to the market. But they say it's very good. They say I've heard the label epic a lot. I think in the fact that I think it may be chronicling multiple points of view or multiple moments in time.
Yeah.
But again, such a timely topic, and so I would not be surprised to sort of see this film sort of represent someone in international feature, and maybe even finding some success with audiences.
Right. Exactly. I agree. You know, I heard good things about this film too. I thought that it was I heard that it was a very compelling piece.
And then when we speak about crossover success with audiences, I think there are two films that are, again, just really primed to break out, hopefully, I think over the spring, which is number one, The Banquet, right? Which is by Andrew Ann. We had an opportunity to see that.
We did see that.
Wonderful ensemble. I think, this is a crowd pleaser. It was certainly a crowd pleaser when we saw it in its premiere.
Yeah, it's a film it's pretty ready for mass appeal.
Right.
It's a remake of the Ang Lee film.
Right. And James Schamus, I even think, is sharing some of the credit here for the screenplay. I think he wrote the original one.
Right.
And it sort of came to the festival with Bleecker already with the film already attached. So I think Bleecker may have a success here. And if it does find success, the reason why I mention it is because I wouldn't be surprised if a successful The Banquet, a banquet that breaks out over the spring, that can make a nice chunk of change, is able to sort of muster some type of, for example, SAG Ensemble nomination at the end of the year. And it would be a very big coup, I think, for Andrew Ann, who hasn't really had an opportunity to sort of show his movie to wider audiences yet.
Right.
So, yeah.
Fire Island was a Hulu thing.
Exactly.
Right.
And it did have a lot of appeal there, right?
And then Spa
Night.
Spa Night was it was
a smaller film, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it might have been Strand releasing, I think maybe, or Kino Lorber that released that. But I think it's great for him to finally have a film that's going to get out there to a larger audience in a theatrical sense.
Right.
And I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility to have a SAG Ensemble nomination there when you have Bowen Yang, Lily Gladstone, you have Young Jin Yoon, you have Joan Chen, wonderful actors, actors that are getting a chance to shine, and I even think one actor is making his English language debut. So Kelly Marie Tran's in this as well. So I would not sort of count that out yet.
Right. I think it's a film that for me stood out more than anything for its colorful cast.
Exactly.
Which I think they're all very charming. And I will say that I see more like a possible Independent Spirit Award Best Screenplay nomination, kind of more than I do like a SAG award, for the ensemble right now, at least for me. But I get what you're saying. If it's a film that makes a good amount of money, it could factor in a bigger way possibly.
And I think it could be a sleeper hit. I really do. I think I would also mention The Ballad of Wallace Island, which is coming out pretty soon, and that has focus features behind it. Really interesting story here in the sense that it's sort of based on a short film that was nominated for a BAFTA for Best Short Film. People have mentioned the supporting turn by the actor who I think is actually one of the co-writers as well. It sounds like a big crowd pleaser. Of course, Carey Mulligan is there, the lead actor, also involved with that short film, one of the co-writers on that. And I think it could find a lot of crossover success. It seems like it's going to have its element of romance and humor. And I the other reason I bring it up is because if it is a success, I do think that there's original music in here.
Yeah.
And so I would not be surprised, especially with that, as I said, aforementioned BAFTA nomination for the short, and BBC is involved in the production here.
It could be a contender for song.
Exactly.
Original
I would
song.
not be surprised to see it contend for something like original song and for it to get some BAFTA love and on those long lists, depending again on how it does in the market. And right now I can see it sort of, again, being sort of a sleeper hit.
Right. And two films that I think are interesting to mention here, because I think they similarly kind of, disappointed for people a little bit. Just to mention them really quick, was Benedict Cumberbatch had a movie with The Thing with Feathers, which I don't think, I think people were mostly disappointed by it.
Yeah.
And also, interestingly enough, Olivia Colman had a film with John Lithgow, Jimpa, which I think also kind of disappointed. We didn't get a chance to see either. But
Sophie Hyde, I believe, the
Yeah.
director of that, had directed Good Luck,
Good
Julia
Luck, Julia
Grant
Grant.
beforehand,
Right.
and that figured into the race. And I think Emma Thompson got really close to
Right.
nomination for that.
Right. And two other films that I think did really well that, again, unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to see were Ira Sachs's Peter Hujar's Day. We love Ira Sachs. He's an incredible filmmaker.
Yeah.
In 2023, his most recent film, Passages, was one of the best films of that year.
Went to Sundance.
It went to Sundance. And it actually did get, factor into the race somewhat. Franz Rogowski, an
Yeah.
incredible actor, one of my favorite actors. He ended up winning the New York Film Critics Circle
Yeah.
for Best Actor. And so, it wasn't, he didn't get nominated for any of the broadcast
Right.
awards, but it was a film that was in the bubble.
Yeah, and it included Adele Exarchopoulos,
Oh, yes,
who
and-
everyone
yeah.
remembers from Blues Woman's Color,
Right.
and Ben Whishaw,
And Ben
is there,
Whishaw, and
who
Ben
he's going
Whishaw,
to reteam with,
and
right?
so Ben Whishaw is in this film, playing the famous photographer Peter Hujar. And I think the film has an experimental take. I think it's just basically a conversation between him and his friend Linda Rosenkrantz in the 1970s in his apartment. And I think that's pretty much the premise of the film. It's just
Right.
the conversation.
Yeah.
I think some people were a little bit thrown off by that premise, but I think critics have really responded to it. It was bought by Janus Films.
Yeah, which is a huge
Right.
coup.
Right. And
First
so
time
right.
No, they released Passages as well.
No,
I
no,
think.
Passages was Mubi.
Mubi. I'm sorry, excuse me. I
Right.
thought Mubi would have picked this up.
Right. But I expect this film to do really well with critics and to sort of be in that conversation of, year's best, these top 10 lists, top 15 lists, top 20 lists, whatever. I think it's a film that's going to, have a good chunk of acclaim.
Yeah.
And another film that did well was Rebuilding. And it had a very good critical reception. And it, of course, is very timely because it has to do with a wildfire that's occurring in this community right off of this, American tragedy that happened with the California wildfires. That was something that people on the ground at Sundance were really talking about.
Right.
And it's just a very timely story. And it got very good mentions for Josh O'Connor and his performance. He's coming off a great year last year. He has another great year coming up this year. And so I expect him to be a, formidable figure just with all his projects point blank this year. And so he can add this to that long list. I think he has The Music Man coming out as well. And he's got a good number of projects coming out.
Right. I think if nothing else, Rebuilding will be an additional feather in the cap of Josh O'Connor. I fully expect him to be around for Cannes with one of his other titles.
Right.
And then I expect him to be around for Telluride
Yeah.
or possibly maybe even Venice for another title. So I think we'll be seeing Josh O'Connor at plenty of festivals. And it's only a matter of time before he finally is nominated.
Yeah.
And sort of the angle here of the group of work
Yeah.
might actually end up pushing him
Yeah.
to that nomination
Yeah.
this year.
100%.
I don't know if Rebuilding is the title. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a distributor yet.
Right.
But I do know that the filmmaker, I think, worked well with Bleecker Street a few years ago with A Love Song. And so I wouldn't be shocked if Bleecker Street sort of rolls the dice on this film
Right.
and sort of capitalizes on that idea that Josh O'Connor is going to have a really big breakout year. And, the thing about Ira Sachs and Peter Hujar's Day is, as amazing as he is, it's just hard for him to ever figure into the Oscars. And you sort of have to have such a monster perfect situation for that ever to happen. Unfortunately, he's such an amazing filmmaker, but because he's told so many different stories and so many stories that you would think would appeal to the Academy anyway, whether it's Little Men or Love is Strange, right? He just hasn't been able to cross over, and I'm not sure that Peter Hujar's Day is going to be the film to sort of have him cross over, even though, again, Ben Whishaw has been on the bubble for a
Yes,
while now, and
yes.
so it's only a matter of time.
Yeah, I would look out for Ben Whishaw again. I think this film is going to, uh, be something that critics mention at year's end to some degree, and I would watch out. Ben Whishaw, I think, is in the right place to be in a place of contention with regard to regional critics, possibly even New York Film Critics Circle or National Society of Film Critics. So watch out for Ben Whishaw in that capacity.
I mean, it's going to happen at some point,
right?
You know that.
And I would say probably one of the films we most heard about at the festival, talked about, was If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You,
Right.
starring
I
Rose
think,
Byrne.
yeah, I think after that group of films, I'm going to say that the films that remain are what I call the big three. And these are the films that I think have the most potential to go the distance with Oscar voters and accolades and, sort of stick around in the conversation, especially as we start going through the summer season and the fall season and we start getting these other lineups and films. Again, they will fall by the wayside. All you have to do is look up Blitz from last year. Right. So I think these are the big three. And I think a great place to start is, as you said, If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You.
Right. This is Mary Bronstein's second feature. Her first one being Yeast, which I think came out a while ago.
I don't even remember.
And so this is a film that, again, we heard a lot of people talk about. And it's basically a film. We did get the opportunity to see this film. And it's basically centers around a woman, kind of undergoing this kind of nervous breakdown because a lot of chaos is surrounding her regarding, her parenting and her child and, her marriage and her profession. So everything is sort of, chaotic, coming to a head. And so, it's a sort of a dark comedy, has a lot of dark elements to it. But also, there's quite a bit of humor to it. We had an audience that was laughing at a lot of set pieces. I will say that there's a big Safdie's energy to this movie. Very, very, very big. And it's, not surprising. And Mary Bronstein, I think, is one of her partners.
I believe it's Ronald.
Right.
Ronald Bronstein. Yeah.
Right.
He's been a collaborator.
He's collaborated with the Safdie brothers. And so I feel this film is really inspired by that style. I would say that that's an aspect to this film that I find a little bit detrimental. I think there's a lot of, again, chaos going on in this film, but in a way, I thought sometimes the film was a little bit distracted by that chaos, as opposed to kind of, focus. I think the film could have been a little bit more focused. I do think it centers around a great performance by Rose Byrne. She's a great actor. She's a very underestimated actor. She's always phenomenal. She's absolutely phenomenal here. She gets a chance to really showcase what she can do, and she's riveting. So I think that's probably the aspect of this film that most stuck with me. And I think probably the aspect that I think has the most potential to kind of carry over as the year progresses.
Right. It's a very claustrophobic piece that's going to make some viewers uncomfortable. I think some critics have even quoted as being a very unpleasant experience, but one they're grateful for anyway. The problem is that some Oscar voters are just going to find it unpleasant.
Right.
And some of them may be short on the gratitude because they have a more conventional mindset for when it comes to films.
Right.
I do think that Rose Byrne is a very undervalued actor. She has yet to be nominated. I think she will be nominated at some point. I think she's going to be very competitive here if critics get behind her. I think, it's not, in my opinion, unlike Toni Collette in Hereditary in the sense that it's an unconventional pick for the traditional Academy Awards voter or broadcast award voter. And so this would need a lot of support from regional critics and certainly the top three, New York, LA, National Film Critics. But I think it's possible that happens for her. I think one theme that we're going to talk about throughout this season is sort of the Safdie brothers, the A24 connection. Again, A24 distributing this movie. They have yet to announce when that is, but we already know that they have two Safdie brothers movies, individual films coming out later this year, probably going to figure heavily into the race at some point. And so I wonder if there's enough energy to go around to sort of push each movie. And we sort of talked about this with Sorry Baby, but one of the big issues for any film released by A24 is that A24 is going to have to pick a favorite. Right. They're going to have to pick a second. And if you're outside of that, you're going to have a difficult time sort of getting in, right? And so I think that's part of the issue here. And another one is that there isn't much else to campaign besides Rose Byrne's turn. I don't think the screenplay is going to be embraced by the writers branch.
Yeah.
I do think that the film may foreshadow what ends up being a big year for A$AP Rocky. He does appear in Spike Lee's film, which I think is going to end up going to Cannes. We'll see what happens. He's very good in this film too. People have mentioned him as a very strong ensemble. A lot of people were making a lot out of Conan O'Brien.
I thought he was actually pretty good in this film.
He was very good in it. It has one of my favorites, Danielle from Patty Cakes is in here,
yes.
and she's absolutely wonderful. And there is so much going on in the movie, and there's a lot of things that are unconventional, dare I say erratic, that it may be a turnoff to voters. But if critics really champion this, they're going to force the voters' hand to at least watch this film and pop the screener. For example, I'm not sure if they're going to campaign this comedy or drama at the Golden Globes.
Right.
If she gets a nomination there, I think that helps. Rose Byrne is no stranger to the SAG Awards, I believe. I think she's been nominated, I think at least with her ensembles, if not individually. So it wouldn't surprise me to see her get a mention there, even though we know that they're not necessarily nuts for Safdie brothers films. They haven't really crashed there yet. But again, the Safdie brothers theme will be a large part of this whole season. And so this is the entry point. And as festivals appear, we're going to revisit the name Safdie and unconventional turns and filmmakers that are ripe for attention. And we're going to find out if Mary Bronstein maybe figures in there. It's not her first film. Actually, that film, Yeast, I actually think starred a young Greta Gerwig.
Yeah.
So there is a little bit of a connection there. And does A24 have the firepower to sort of campaign everything equally and sort of make a dent in each individual race? We're going to find out. But there's a lot of sort of weak points in terms of how appealing the film is. For example, we haven't even started talking about theatrical. I don't think this is Uncut Gems at all. I think, Uncut Gems, the way they released that on sort of crashing Christmas Day with Adam Sandler, it's tough for me to think that this movie is going to be able to find a theatrical audience, right? And I think that may be a major factor, especially when you consider that the other two Safdie brother movies may be bigger audience players in terms of releasing theatrical and finding an audience and making some money. And that might be a pivotal hurdle for this film.
Right. I think, like I said, I think it bears mentioning that, even though I think you and I were a little bit more a little bit more restrained with our enthusiasm for the film, it was a film that did well critically. It has a lot of critical acclaim. Critics really responded to this, and maybe we'll be mentioning it down the line, but this film was actually picked up to be screened at the Berlin Film Festival.
That's right.
And it would go on to win the best actor award for Rose Byrne, which was a huge coup for her.
Yeah.
And again, it's not, if you see the film, it's not hard to see why. The film is really, I think, at its best when it's sort of really focused in on this performance that is very, very compelling.
Right.
From Rose Byrne.
And that wasn't, I think, an uncompetitive win. I think it was a competitive. There were a lot of choices that year. So I think it was great for Rose Byrne to sort of turn that out. And it's a great sort of first step. Again, I think the next step is deciding a release date, trying to get an audience to watch it, and then sort of, again, forcing the hand of critics and certainly major critics, which I think Toni Collette for Hereditary was missing sometimes. You really have to push their hand if you want to make something like Rose Byrne happen. And then again, I think sort of ingrained in the movie is that if it goes anywhere, it sort of goes by herself because there's so little else to point out in the movie that's, ready for a voter to say, oh, I want to nominate that.
Yes.
The next movie to talk about, I think, in that big three is actually the adaptation of the Broadway musical Kiss of the Spider Woman, which premiered at Sundance, right? And that was one of the bigger titles to premiere. I think a lot of people mentioned how it was not a typical movie you would show at Sundance, certainly because it's a musical, but also it looked like a bigger project. And I will say that when I saw it, I was really sort of impressed by how much movie was there in terms of, everything they were able to achieve, and what I can only imagine. And what I think has been sort of said has been a more modest budget.
Yeah.
I think we're talking about the high 20s or the 30s. And so a lot of things going for this project. I mean, Bill Condon is no stranger to the Oscars, right?
Yes.
Like former Academy Award winner for Gods and Monsters, but he also made Kinsey, which was able to get a nomination for Laura Linney. Gods and Monsters, of course, nominated for Ian McKellen and Lynn Redgrave. And then he was able to get one of the few writing nominations for a musical with Chicago. And then his film Dreamgirls, another musical, showed up in 8 categories. I mean, 3 of which were song, but Jennifer Hudson won an Academy Award. Eddie Murphy was honored for supporting actor.
Catherine Zeta-Jones.
Won
for
exactly,
Chicago.
Even though Rob Marshall, I believe, directed that film.
Yes.
But again, the costumes and I believe the art direction, the sound work. I think the sound work of Dreamgirls even won. And I think even if you look at something more recently like Beauty and the Beast, the live action remake there.
Got a few nominations.
Including for production design and costume design, and was a huge hit in theaters. I think it's a very impressive movie. I think there's a lot going for it. A lot of people were talking about the performances.
Yes.
And the performances, I think, are certainly a highlight of the film.
Yes.
And I think that's across the board. I think people were really sort of amazed by the job that Jennifer Lopez does. And sort of, they kept talking about this idea that she hasn't been in a musical. And it's absolutely crazy when you see the film that she has not been in a big musical. The musical numbers are so well realized. And I thought they were some of the most visually rich sort of set pieces I saw within the film and possibly within the entirety of Sundance. I think this is certainly one of Tobias Schleiser's, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, one of his best looking films.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of work there. And I think that's a great place to sort of spotlight the work of someone like Colleen Atwood.
Oh, yes.
Who's doing the costume design there. And again, she's no stranger to Academy Awards and nominations. And we all know her legendary sort of collaborations with Tim Burton. The production design and the musical numbers, again, is quite beautiful as well. I believe Scott Chambliss, who has yet to be nominated for an Oscar, but has been nominated plenty of times among his guild. So they did beautiful work there. And then, I mean, back to the performances. I mean, Jennifer Lopez does a wonderful job in the musical aspects, and there's a lot of comedy to it. But I think not enough people mentioned how great Diego Luna is in this film. And he has more of a supporting turn here, but he's so perfectly cast.
Yeah.
I bought him in the musical numbers, but more than anything, sort of the dramatic heart of the film that he shares with his scene partner. I thought he did a fantastic job. And I, again, would not be surprised to see a lot of mentions for him later in the year. And then a lot of people had so many great things to say about the young actor Tonatiuh, who is the lead in the film.
Yes.
Right. And he just did an absolutely fantastic job.
Fantastic.
Right. And he got a lot of great ink. I think this is one of his first film roles and certainly his first leading role.
Yes.
Right. Because he is the true lead of the film.
Yes.
And he is playing the role that was, I think, made popular by William Hurt, who won an Oscar for the same role in 1985. And I think it'd be good to talk about that. The idea that something really going for this film is that it's such a respected property, right?
Yes.
In 1985, it was able to score nominations for picture and director for The Great Babenco. William Hurt was able to win. Raul Julia, who played Valentin, did not get nominated, but he got really close. And I will say he was campaigned as a co-lead. Even though he did get a lot of traction, I think he did get a Golden Globe nomination. Also nominated for screenplay at the Academy Awards. At the Golden Globes, even Sonia Braga was nominated for the part of the Spider-Woman. And again, Sonia Braga has yet to be nominated, but again, she was nominated for that at the Golden Globes. And then beyond that sort of layer of sort of prestige that the project has, you sort of add on this additional layer because it gets adapted from the original novel and from the movie again into the Broadway musical. And then you put in names like Terrence McNally, you put in names like Chita Rivera, you put Candor and Ebb. And so it's just a really respected project. And now it's come to Bill Condon, who again, I wouldn't call him an Oscar favorite, but I would certainly say he's on their radar and he makes projects that they respond to. Now, not all his projects do well, but I think more often than not, he makes a project that resonates with voters. Even something like, I remember Mr. Holmes was sort of a sleeper hit in 2015. And I think if the campaign had been managed a little bit better, I wouldn't be surprised to see Ian McKellen pick up more steam for that, and certainly more text for that film. Again, teaming with Laura Linney there. The sound team is also really good on this, and I think it even includes Tom Fleischman, who has won an Oscar, has collaborated with some really prominent filmmakers. So again, to me, this is one of two Sundance projects that has a lot of sort of pedigree, right? And a lot of contention for numerous categories sort of built into the project in and of itself. You know, I'm talking about the costumes, the production design, the sound, the acting. I think by virtue of it being able to compete in multiple categories, it stands out. Yeah. And so
that's to its benefit.
That's really to its benefit. It's sort of the opposite of, for example, something like If I Had Legs, where again, I can't see it having much more traction than Best Actress.
Right.
But here's something that could hit above the line and even below the line because it is a musical. And I also think that, you know, when we saw it, I think the audience really ate it up. And so I do think that the commercial prospects on this film are high, and could potentially be, you know, unconventional numbers for what is a Sundance premiere. So I think that's yet another factor going for it. And so I think that this is a strong contender for a lot of categories.
Right. You know, I think I was impressed with a lot of aspects of this film. I think it has a lot of strengths, and a lot of compelling aspects to it. I will say, I do think that it's not a film that's going to be for everyone. But I want to say something interesting about this film, and that I think it's a very interesting antithetical piece to what just happened last year with Emilia Pérez and Netflix, in that I feel this film is a more proper, adequate, fair representation of, for example, the trans experience, queerness in general. The film is very queer forward, which I think is one of its biggest strengths. There's a lot of Latino involvement in the project. It feels very Latino centric. I know the 1985 film had more to do with, you know, Brazilian politics. Right. But this one is more Latino centric, aiming to sort of have, you know, this is supposed to be occurring in an Argentinian prison. But, you know, the film feels that way. You can feel the Latino collaboration and talent in this film, not just from its, from its respect for the source material, but also the performers. And so in a way, I feel like people who had more of an issue with Emilia Pérez stand to really respond to this film that I think does a lot of things that Emilia Pérez didn't do so well. And maybe even vice versa. If you really liked Emilia Pérez, maybe you'll like this film a little less. Right. Because again, they're both sort of opposite. They're both dealing with similar ingredients, but the ultimate product feels different.
Right.
And so I also think there's something interesting too, as you were saying, the trajectory of this material that, you know, has had such a long, you know, history. And really, you know, a history that is sort of imbued with critical acclaim, but also awards.
Right.
So you talk about the 1985 film, which was a winner of Best Actor and was nominated for Best Picture. You talk about the Tony musical, which swept the Tonys that year. And so I think this film has that going for it. And maybe possibly that's something that's going to have to fight against because it has all this reiteration of material.
Right.
Possibly we'll see what happens there. But I think there's a lot of rich things about the film. I do think the musical numbers are just dazzling. They're beautiful. They look great.
Yeah.
The production design in those numbers is wonderful. The costumes are divine.
Yeah.
And I will say that I thought, Jennifer Lopez was a really big standout in this. She's sort of synonymous with the musical numbers
Right.
because that's when she appears.
Exactly.
And, I thought she gave an incredible performance here. I think it really highlights all her strengths as a performer, her as an actress, her as a dancer, her as a singer. It's all sort of packaged into one, and it's a very, it's a wonderful performance from her. I will say, I think, Jennifer Lopez has had this sort of unfair relationship with the Academy Awards. She was so unfortunately snubbed from Hustlers a few years back, which was incredibly disappointing. And, when you look at her filmography and you look at films like Selena and Out of Sight and An Actor Who's Never Had Her Due,
Right.
She has a really, prime spot here to really shine and really kind of, make up for those losses and nominations.
Yeah.
Because she gets a real chance to shine here. You can't help but see when she's on the screen, she really, you get a little bit of Marilyn Monroe, you get a little bit of Ava Gardner, you get a little bit of Rita Hayworth.
Yeah.
You just feel that presence, you feel that glamour, you feel that exuberance of 50s musical starlets, and it's really just lovely. It's just really powerful,
and it's really memorable too.
Yeah.
That's what the film is asking of her, and she delivers in aces.
Yeah. And so whenever she's on screen, you can't help but feel the echo of those beautiful starlets, and it's a great aspect to this film. It's thrilling.
Yeah, and audiences clapped and everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
They ate it up.
And I completely agree with you. I think this is one of Diego Luna's best performances. I was completely convinced by his character.
Oh, yeah.
And I think the chemistry between him and Tonatiuh was very compelling and very believable. And so, I thought he was fantastic here.
And he fits the character like a glove.
Spectacularly. And then I will say, I agree. Tonatiuh was absolutely fantastic here. I think he carries the entire film on his shoulders. It's so exciting to see a new performer, kind of take on this risk and this venture and carry it off wonderfully. He has a beautiful voice. And so whenever he's in the musical numbers, it also stands out to me. And there's just so much heart and soul to his performance. I think he was really a performance that stood out to a lot of people throughout the festival period.
Yeah.
And I think he really is the heart of this movie. And so I hope to see traction for all of these performers.
I mean, when you look at someone like Tonatiuh and, the National Award Review hands out that breakthrough actor thing,
right,
he's definitely going to contend in awards like that.
Yeah.
And again, certainly Golden Globes. And again, if people push it forward, I really do think that he has a chance to sort of come close at the very least to that nomination.
Yeah, I would love that. Again, I think he's the heart here. I would love for these three performers to get traction. I agree with you. The performances here are probably, for me, the biggest highlight of the movie. And as you said, Bill Condon is no stranger to the Academy Awards. I think he is on their radar. And there's some, this feels very, he excels here. He excels in the musical aspects of this movie because this is sort of his bread and butter in a way,
right,
and he does it wonderfully. But I also felt like I was quite touched by several aspects of the relationship between the two men.
Yeah.
And I thought that was handled with care as well.
Yeah, I think that's one thing going for the movie is that it does have sort of this glamorous musical aspect that is very much an homage to golden Hollywood musicals. Yes. And it absolutely aces all of that. But it's also a really moving story, right? And it has a timeliness that is perfect for the campaign right now. If you're going to campaign this, I also think that, it has had so many iterations, but Bill Condon makes some bold changes here.
Yes,
I
think it's probably the most. I think it's the most radical film that Bill Condon has ever done, in my opinion.
Right.
And I think that's, not saying nothing.
Right.
Right. But I 100% agree with you.
And I think that it's going to be changes like that I don't want to, get to and, speak to in depth on. But I think it's those changes that are really going to make, critics and audience members sort of say, oh, well, I do think it's adding something new to the discussion. But so I really think that, to me, the only... As someone who loves the original 1985 movie, I think that personally for me, one of the shortcomings is that I feel like it could have a little more brutality in terms of its depiction of the prison system, right? I get why you maybe don't want to, depict that too sort of vividly, because you are trying to balance these two aspects that would feel odd. It's certainly a juggling that you have to do. But to me, the only sort of reason why this film isn't locked and loaded in several races and certainly like sort of cementing its competitiveness in multiple races above the line and below the line is really only because it hasn't been picked up yet. Yeah. And again, the only thing I can say to that is that it's the volatility of the marketplace and sort of the cowardice and being risk averse. I think this movie would actually do really well if you
put it in the right hands.
If you put it in the right hands and you show it to a wide audience and you release it at the right time. But I think it needs care. I think it needs care because it's a very specific project. And so you can't be putting it 4th or 5th or 6th on your list. But if someone like Fox Searchlight had bought this film, I would have said, yes, Diego Luna is going to be nominated, Jennifer Lopez is going to be nominated, Tonatiuh is going to contend, costumes, production design, sound, the works. But they haven't bought it yet. I don't know why they're waiting necessarily. All I can say is maybe they're waiting till after Cannes. One aspect that I would talk about is, speaking of Searchlight, I think this would fit really well for Sony Classics.
Yeah, I thought so too.
There is this sort of international element, and I actually feel that this film could potentially play even bigger overseas than in the domestic market.
Right.
And so part of me, knowing that Sony Classics likes releasing these sort of international films to domestic audiences, I think whoever picks this up internationally is going to be really big. It's going to be very important because you have to campaign to more international voters. I think you have to focus your campaign on all of these aspects. I don't think a campaign sort of dedicated just to Tonatiuh or just to Jennifer Lopez is really going to work for the film. I think you have to sort of campaign it as one giant product, one giant film, all these different aspects. And then I do think there's a part of me that sort of, there's an element in the way the film is made and what it talks about that, kind of flirts with the aesthetic or the colors or a little bit of the
100%. I agree with you.
Skewness of an Almodovar film. Yeah. That's why I thought of Sony Classics. Yeah. Again, I don't know why they haven't jumped on it, but I know that the outrun took a while to sort of stick with Sony Classics, I guess, to maybe get a number that they liked. And I know that this is one of the pricier films at Sundance. But again, I do feel like the film, to a certain extent, sort of campaigns itself once you sort of commit to it.
Right.
And that it does have a bright future in terms of the major theatrical market. I don't know if Sundance was the place to premiere it. I wonder if a section in Cannes would have been better. There is more international appeal there. I don't know if it could play. I mean, some people have said that it might play Toronto or Telluride later. I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't know if this is a better fall release, winter release, or summer release. I can't make that out yet because I think it has to be, a really sort of intricate campaign and rollout. But I think if you're a distributor and you commit the time to it, I think there's an abundance of reward that you're going to reap with this film at the end.
Yeah. I think, we're waiting to see who buys it. And I think the fact that it's lacking a distributor right now is what's kind of creating some uncertainty here.
Right. But almost everything in Sundance is lacking a distributor.
Exactly.
That's really the big problem.
Yeah, exactly. It's certainly not alone in that conversation. But we'll see what happens there.
And then I think the last film to talk about as the big three is Train Dreams, right? Which is one of the rare films to have been able to pick up a distributor, right, in Netflix.
Yes.
And so we know that Netflix, to a certain degree, believes in the film, is going to try to campaign the film. A lot of things going for this film, right?
We didn't get a chance to see it.
Yes, we did not get a chance to see it.
But we did hear really, really good things about it. It got really well received critically. It has a really good critical reception.
Right.
And, I think amongst these top three, we consider it to be probably, the top of the top three.
Right, exactly. I think this is Again, one of the I guess the most competitive title. Again, because like Kiss of the Spider Woman, it has multiple categories where it can hit. People have certainly talked about The Turn from Joel Edgerton, right?
Yes.
And
Who's due for a nomination?
who's due for nomination at some point. People have really spotlighted the cinematography. And well, let's start with this. This is another feature. So this is the same team, more or less, from Sing Sing that sort of failed to sort of capture that nomination in January. They went on to premiere a film in Sundance in January. And again, it was met with overwhelmingly positive reception by critics and audiences. And so Clint Bentley is directing this one, but he did score a nomination on the screenplay for Sing Sing, right? Along with Greg Quidar, who scored a nomination for writing as well. He's co-writing this one. I believe they're both producing. Black Bear is one of the companies behind this film. They were also working on Sing Sing. And so I debate whether that's a plus or a minus.
Right, because they were just there.
Exactly. Is this a plus in the sense that we're more familiar with their work and we know that this isn't a one-off, we know that they make good films, and we know that we sort of skipped them last year and we have sort of an IOU with them?
Well, they did get nominated as writers.
Right, but they didn't get nominated for the big one.
Yeah,
and again, this is, again, a movie that could potentially compete for Best Picture.
Yes.
Right? The reception is really good. And Netflix is behind it. So you have to wonder if they're going to approach it with the IOU or they're going to approach it with the sort of been there, done that. I want to nominate you not consecutively, right? I don't want to nominate you consecutively. Clint Bentley had previously directed Jockey, which did really well here at Sundance as well. And, at one point there was this idea that, Clifton Collins Jr. could finally muster a nomination for that. It didn't happen. It was too small of a film, too intimate of a film. So he hasn't necessarily broken in as a director yet. It is based on a popular novella, which I believe was shortlisted for the Pulitzer, and I think that helps. And the writer in and of himself isn't a stranger to the movie treatment because he, I think, also wrote the source material for Jesus' Son, which was made into a film, and a wonderful film. And even though it didn't make much noise when it came out, I think 2000, 2001, I think it's only grown in sort of admiration and appreciation from viewers, both in the industry and just cinephiles. So I think that really helps. I think Casey Affleck is an executive producer on this, and I think he might have been attached to act in it, to be the lead in it at some point.
Right.
But this is, again, a film, a period piece, sort of chronicling this individual who's
a laborer
in the American West, and sort of you get to see time pass as he's working on these different things. And
also, I think recovering from a tragedy or tragedies involved in some matter.
Right. I think there's a familial loss, but at the same time, there's this, people keep talking about this sort of epicness to the film, right? And also a lot of visual beauty to the film. And the cinematographer is who also worked on Jockey. And he was able to get a mention, I think, from the
Spotlight.
A Spotlight Award from the Cinematographers Guild. So he's not a complete stranger there either. And I think he's presented films at the Camera Image. So he is, slowly building that sort of reputation amongst his cinematographers. And it has a very good supporting cast, from what I've heard, including William H. Macy and Felicity Jones. And the story just in and of itself, what I know of it, sounds like it could certainly be the kind of thing that would be nominated for adapted screenplay. I think Joe Edgerton, as we said, is
very much overdue,
due for a nomination. But there's this aspect to the performance, which is that the film
has a lot of narration.
What I've heard is a lot of narration by the wonderful Will Patton.
Yes.
But I do wonder if that is going to affect how, actors, sort of perceive the performance, if they're going to, take that away from the performance and maybe sort of have that be a reason why they keep him off.
Is that a plus or a minus?
Shortlist? Is that a plus or a minus? I don't know. Again, I do think Clint Bentley, not unlike Greg, is not going to necessarily be able to break into director yet because they're very specific about who they want to highlight.
Yeah.
But I think it's certainly in contention for adapted screenplay, actor, possibly picture. People talk about the cinematography, and again, he's no stranger to cinematographers now. I think a lot of it is really going to depend on Netflix,
Yeah.
right? I think a lot of these films, the big idea that my big takeaway is that a lot of it depends on the campaign, right? If Focus Features maybe focused on DD a little bit more than Conclave, the outcome might have been different. If it wasn't Amazon behind My Old Ass, the outcome might have been different. If it wasn't Sony Classics with The Outrun, it might have been different. So I do wonder if Netflix has the ability to sort of campaign multiple movies, and you know they're going to pick up movies down the line.
Yeah.
And if they're going to give this film the sort of rollout that it would need. I also wonder if, from what I understand, the way it's photographed, if it wouldn't benefit
from a theater release,
a large screen.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. I agree with you 100%. I think this film has all the ingredients to make a big impact in terms of the acclaim, the source material, Joel Edgerton, who I think a lot of people want to see nominated, awarded in some capacity. He's one of our great actors. And this team was there just last year, so obviously they respond to the work to some degree. Sing Sing didn't get an eye for Best Picture, but it still got 3 nominations, among them a Best Actor nomination and Best Screenplay nomination. I do wonder, again, if the back-to-back kind of thing is going to hurt or help. My gut right now tells me that it hurts that they were just there, nominated for Screenplay.
Right.
And I think it does hurt that it's a Netflix production. I mean, Netflix
Release.
acquired the project, because I don't think that they're that great at, juggling a lot of their releases. They usually have like one horse that they're kind of put all their attention to. That being said, they do pretty well in the acting categories. They do manage to get attention for some of their actors in the acting category.
Right.
So I think that's going for Joel Edgerton. Like you said, I think it would benefit from a theatrical experience based on what people are saying about the photography. And so I have questions about, again, as you were saying, Netflix, back-to-back nominations, but it is a film that I think has all the right elements to, have staying power.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a film that could hit above the line and below the line. I would have preferred, and this is, again, the minutia of an Oscar season, but that's really what it comes down to. Had Sing Sing been released when it was supposed to be released in 2023,
Right.
and they had a gap, I would like its chances better.
Right. I agree.
If it wasn't consecutive nominations. I would argue that because Sing Sing was not released in 2023, it probably missed out on more nominations that it might have gotten had it been released in 2023.
Yeah.
That's, again, another mistake. And so those are things that hopefully movies and campaigns and producers and financiers and distributors are paying attention to. You shouldn't wait to acquire these movies. You shouldn't wait a whole year. That's something hopefully you learned last year through Sing Sing. And we'll talk about this because there are a bunch of movies that are going to be released late that are from last year that, the sort of energy behind them has been sucked out.
Yeah.
And that's probably poor decision-making. And the other thing is that I would have liked it more had this film not been Netflix and had maybe been Focus Features. Had they moved from A24 to Focus Features, I think that would have been good. Or another boutique instead of Netflix. Like I said, I think what we've realized last year with Netflix is that Netflix is never going to win Best Picture unless they really, really, really totally recalibrate their structure of releasing films. It just, the respect isn't there. So there's a chance that this is just another sort of really wonderful film that sort of gets lost on Netflix. I sort of think about, something like Mudbound that was sort of able to muster that attention at the end. Multiple actors got attention for it. The screenplay was nominated. The cinematography was nominated. But I do think that they were able to beat the odds, right? Mudbound, because usually it's the kind of film that would get lost. And lo and behold, that year was, I think, Netflix's first competitive year at the Oscars. They did not get an for Best Picture, not amongst 9.
They might have, though.
They
10.
might have, but starting then, Netflix starts to have a little bit of a streak, right? And so that being said, in 2017, that was the Netflix movie they were pushing. There wasn't multiple Netflix movies, and you kind of know that at some point they're going to get something flashier than Train Dreams, and they're going to give Train Dreams the sort of the B movie treatment.
unless for example, Khan comes through and they don't find anything that they feel has enough broad appeal for either audiences or the Academy, and they end up saying, well, we didn't find that much at Khan, so we're going to put all the chips on Train Dreams. I mean, that could happen.
It could happen. It could happen. I really doubt it.
If it did happen, would it be a very good thing for Train Dreams?
I don't know. I don't know that it would be a very good thing for Train Dreams because, like I said, I think Netflix sometimes is not always a positive to have in your corner, right? I really think that we're getting to a moment for Oscar voters where you have to sort of prove yourself in the market. And so when Sing Sing comes out and doesn't make
enough money,
much money, I think that's a determining factor.
Right.
And maybe Train Dreams may have been able to capture an audience. I'm not sure.
Right.
At least it does have that source material that probably has a good amount of fans.
Right.
And maybe that would have translated to some success at the box office.
Right.
But so I do think that those are the big
Yes.
three. If I had legs, I'd Kick You, Kiss of the Spider Woman, and Train Dreams. And then I would also keep an eye out for
Rebuilding,
Peter Hoosier's Day. Certainly Josh O'Connor with the year he's going to have. But more importantly, on the U.S. dramatic side, again, the right campaign for Omaha and the right campaign for Sorry Baby could really, 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 surprise you.
right? Yeah, that was our very big dive into the Sundance Film Festival 2025. It was a pleasure to attend the festival and to be able to see the films that we saw. And again, we see a lot of potential handled with care and in the right way for a lot of these titles to be able to compete.
Yeah.
Let's hope that they land in the right hands.
Yeah, they have to go to the right hands, and you have to be smart about it, and you have to be committed. But there's absolutely a lot of potential here.
All right. And so this concludes this episode. Thank you for joining us on what is episode 1 of our season 2. We're going to be in this sort of spring, summer season. We're going to be trying to have a usual time slot of Fridays. So you can look for a new episode of Academy Anonymous every Friday.
Perfect. Mark your calendars.
And signing off, this is Jules.
And I'm Joseph.
And it's been a pleasure. The music on this episode, entitled Cool Cats, was graciously provided by Kevin MacLeod and Incompetech.com. Licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0. http://creativecommons.org/licenses/by/3.0.
Disclaimer. The Academy Anonymous podcast is in no way affiliated or endorsed by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences.